Hi, this is Beersborn. Welcome back to Game Design. In today's video, we're going to start using Construct 3, and we're going to make a simple game. Now here I am on the Construct 3 homepage. If you're not sure how to get into Construct 3, watch the last tutorial video. It'll walk you through how to click on the link and enter in the code and everything. I'm going to go ahead and log in using my teacher code. Don't look at my password. Okay, there we go. Now, this is what the Construct 3 homepage looks like. Most of the stuff we don't really have to worry about. There are tutorial videos and stuff in here, but I don't think that they're super useful for what we're doing. We'll have our own tutorial videos for the class. There are different game examples you can play, and these are all things that have been made in Construct, and you can see how they were made, which is kind of interesting. But for today, let's just go ahead and make our own game. And to make a new game, we have to click on New. Up in the top there, you'll see a button for New. Click on that. And a window pops up where we can set the settings for our new project. And we can start by naming it. I'm going to call this Game 1. Now down below that, there's an option for Choose Preset. These are basically just the size and the resolution of your game. SD is kind of low res, 72 isn't that good looking, 1080 is probably where we want to go. That's like a good, nice, crisp looking game. 4K is really high resolution. We probably don't need to do that. Let's just do 1080p. You'll also see options for either landscape or portrait. Landscape will fit a computer monitor. Portrait's more for like mobile phone games. And since we're using computers right now, let's just use 1080p landscape. So double click on that. And it sets all the settings for you. So all the stuff should be correct. And you can just click on Create. And here we have Construct. This is what the actual workspace looks like. So let's take a minute and just kind of break down what we're looking at here. Over here on the far left, this is the Properties panel, and this has a bunch of different stuff. It looks like a lot. Don't worry about this. We'll talk about this as it comes up, and it's not as complicated as it looks. Over here on the far right, this is the Projects window, and this has all the different files that we're going to make for our game. It's a way of organizing the files, so you can always find what you need over here on the right side. You might see a Layers window down there on the bottom. That's a way of organizing your graphics in the game, and we'll talk about all that stuff more in the future. But what I want to focus on for now is what's happening right here in the middle. You'll see a big white empty space with some gray around it. This is the actual game. Now, right now our game is empty, so it's just white. But you can move around this space. If you see the little scroll bar on the bottom and on the right side, you can move around with those. You can also move around by holding down the space bar on your keyboard and just moving your mouse. We can zoom in and out of this space too. If I hold down the Control key on my keyboard and use the mouse wheel, I can scroll out to zoom out, and use the mouse wheel to scroll in to zoom in. And again, I'm holding down the Control key to do this. And if I zoom all the way out, see this big white rectangle? That's our game. This is going to be the first level of our game. And that white space is where we're going to put all of our different graphics, all of our objects, whether it's the player character or enemies in the background, all that stuff we'll build in here. If you look up in the top left corner, you'll see this dotted line rectangle. That represents the view of the computer screen. Your monitor will see this much of the game's level to start with. So anything that we put in the game, we're going to put in this space because that's how much of the game you can actually see once it starts. Later on, we'll make games where you can move around the screen and have a camera follow you. But for now, this is basically the space of one computer screen. If you look up at the top, you'll see a bunch of stuff. There's a menu. This is the save button, this little kind of rectangle with a circle in it. It's supposed to be like an old school floppy disk. That's the save button. There's an undo and a redo. There's a play button to play the demo of your game. The cool thing about Construct is you can play your game at any point to test stuff out. So if you click on that, a little window pops up. Our game is just empty right now. So it's just a big empty white space, but later on that'll work. The start page, we don't need this really. We can actually close it. And then we have two other tabs. We have a layout tab and we have an event sheet tab. This is really how Construct works. It's the relationship between these two things. The layout is where we put all of the objects in our game. All of the graphics and stuff go in the layout. So as we build up a level, you'll see your main character here. You'll see the items and the enemies in the background, whatever it might be. The event sheet is the code. The way the Construct works is you don't have to learn a coding language. It's all kind of menus-based stuff, but it uses the same kind of techniques, the same logic that basically any game engine will use. So you can learn the basics without having to get bogged down in like learning like a coding language. So we add an object into the layout. Say we add a graphic of our main character, and then we go over to our event sheet and create the code that powers that main character's actions. And that might seem kind of abstract right now, but let's try it out. We'll make something very simple for now. What we're going to do is we're going to add just some kind of object, we'll just make like a face or something into our layout. And to add something into the game, you right-click in the white space, and you'll see an option for Insert New Object. Let's click on that. Now this menu pops up with all the different types of things you can put in the game. You can put in buttons, you can put in particles, you can put in different kinds of control inputs, all different types of stuff. What we want to do is we're going to put in a sprite. And you can just click on it once. If you double click on it, it takes you immediately to putting a sprite in the game. If you click on it one time, it gives you the opportunity to name it, which is handy. Let's just call this, I'm just going to call it Sprite 1. You can call it whatever you want. Now, a sprite is a graphic. A sprite is a visual object. So once you click Insert, a little cross is going to pop up, and you can click anywhere you want in the white space. And this Animations Editor window pops up. This is where we're going to draw our sprite. It's where we're going to draw our first graphic. Now, down the road, we're going to use a different art program that maybe has a little bit more power than the built-in art program does in Construct. But for now, this is all we need. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw just a simple drawing over here in this square. To draw something, you can use these tools over here on the left. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take just a circle, and you can set the color of the circle here in the big rainbow on the left side. You can adjust how light or dark something is. So just kind of choose a color, maybe throw a circle in there. And let's make it a face. I'm going to take the paintbrush, choose a different color. Let's go black on this. Give it some eyes. Take red. Give it a mouth. Perfect. That's a perfect graphic. That's going to be our first sprite. So take a minute, draw something. It honestly doesn't matter what it is. Draw anything you want. But once you're done with it, we can just close the Animations Editor window. So I'm going to click on the X up in the top right corner. And now you'll see your object is in the game. We have our first sprite. I can zoom in. I can hold the Control key and scroll in, get a closer look at that sprite. And we can move it anywhere we want. But we want it to be up here in the top left corner because that's where our screen can see. Now, if I click the play button now, the demo will pop up and I can see my object there, my sprite sitting on the screen. I can't do anything yet. There's no like controller inputs or anything, but I can see that that object does exist in the game now. Let's try making that object do something. Now, the first step towards that is we have to decide what kind of controller our game is going to use. How is the player going to be able to control this object? Let's right-click in the white space. Let's insert a new object. And if I scroll down a little past halfway, you'll see the input section. And these are the options for how we can actually control stuff in our game. Do we want our players to use a gamepad, a keyboard, a mouse, touch screen? We have all these different options. For this, let's use the keyboard. Double click on keyboard or click insert. And now we've added a keyboard to our game. If I look over here on the right side project window, you'll see keyboard, you'll see our sprite 1 in there too. All the different objects are organized here. Now we're ready to go over to the event sheet. So let's click on the event sheet tab. Now remember, the event sheet is where we're going to put what is basically the code that powers the game. The way the construct uses code is by creating what are called events. And we can read through this if you want. It's just kind of a brief summary of the way an event sheet works, but I think it's probably easier if we just make one together. So let's start by clicking the Add Event option up in the top left. Add Event. Now the first thing that comes up is what's called a condition. It says pick an object to create a new condition from. The condition is what has to happen in order for something else to happen in the game. So say, for example, you want your player to press the left arrow to move the character left, or say you want to press the space bar to make your character jump. The condition is the player pressing the key. So we have to think about, okay, let's add a condition here. And let's just try one out. We're going to go to the keyboard. You see we have these 3 different options, right? We have the system. We'll talk about that later. We have the keyboard because we added a keyboard object. We have the sprite 1 with our dumb little face on it because we added the sprite 1. Any objects that we add in will pop up here. Let's double click on keyboard. It's going to say, okay, what do we want the condition to be? There's a bunch of different things for the keyboard here. Key codes we don't really have to worry about, but this is pretty useful. The second section here where it says keyboard, we have an option for checking to see if a key is down, or if any key is released, or if a specific key is released, or if any key is pressed on the keyboard, or if one specific key is pressed on the keyboard. Down below that, we have options for conditions like if the player presses the left or right key, if it's held down, or if it's released. All these are different conditions, different triggers that we can use to make something happen in our game. Let's try doing on key pressed. Double click on key pressed, and it's going to ask you, what key do we want our player to press to make something happen in our game? I'm going to click on click to choose, and I can physically press on my keyboard whatever button I want to use. Let's use the space bar. So I clicked space and you'll see space pops up here. You can press a bunch of different stuff. I can click the A key, or I can click the down arrow or whatever, and it'll pop up right here. But let's try the space bar and click OK. Then click done. Now here is our first event. Over here on the left is where the condition is. So it says, okay, on the keyboard, when the space bar is pressed, that's our condition. Next to it, we can add an action, and we can tell Construct what do we want to have happen when our player presses the space bar. So let's click on Add Action. It's going to ask us, okay, what do we want this action to happen to? Do we want to happen to the whole system that controls the game, or do we want it to happen to our sprite 1, our face that we made? I'm going to say, let's make it happen to our face. So I'm going to double click on sprite 1. And here we have a whole menu of things that can happen when our player presses the space. This is how Construct works. You can decide, okay, when my player presses a certain button, then I can make it, for example, rotate. Or maybe I can make my face change colors, or maybe I can turn it invisible, or maybe I can set its position or make it move in a certain direction. All these things are different options for actions that can happen when the player presses the space bar. Let's start at the top, and let's just try one out. Let's click on Rotate Clockwise. Double click on that. It's going to ask us, okay, we're rotating clockwise, number of degrees to rotate the object clockwise. Let's just pick a certain amount of degrees. I'm going to say 10 degrees and click Done. So when your spacebar is pressed, your sprite 1 rotates 10 degrees clockwise. We can try it out. Press play, hit the spacebar on your keyboard, and every time you press it, your face is going to rotate 10 degrees clockwise. So it works. This is the basic premise. You come up with a condition, you say what the action is going to happen when that condition triggers, and we can do really complex stuff with this. You can make really complicated games just by using this simple idea. Now let's try adjusting it a little bit. You can change the conditions and the actions at any time. So let's double click on our condition where it says keyboard on space pressed. Let's double click that and let's change it. Let's go to the back button, click on back once, and it gives you the option to try something different. Instead of on key pressed, let's try key is down. What that means is if you hold down the key, then you can make the action keep happening. So let's keep the space bar. Now I'm doing keyboard space is down. Let's try that. Now when I hold down the space bar, my face just continuously rotates. Let's try adjusting the action. Let's double click on sprite 1, rotate 10 degrees clockwise. Let's hit the back button and let's try instead going counterclockwise. Click done, click the play button, test it out, hold down the space button, now rotates the opposite direction. Great. It's not much of a game, but it is interactive, right? We have an object that moves on the screen, or at least spins on the screen, when our player presses a button. Awesome. We're going to leave it there today, but let's save our project first, and we'll continue working on this in the next video. To save a project, we have to click on the save button up here on the top. It looks like a black square with some white shapes in it. It's supposed to look like a floppy disk from like the 1980s. Click on that. It's going to ask you about backups. Let's just click Save Anyway for now. Don't worry about the settings, just click on Save Anyway. It's going to ask you, where do you want to save stuff to? I would recommend saving stuff to your Documents folder. So click on Documents, name it. Let's call this one Game 1, and then click Save. Great. We'll continue this in our next video. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.